All right, thank you so much, Mzansi, for commenting and for interacting with us on social media. And we must reiterate again that these are not the views of the SABC nor of Morning Live, but they are the views of the viewers and the commenters.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to all of you for interacting with. We're actually going to continue the discussion now. Award-winning journalist Qaanitah Hunter is back, as well as SABC News Editor Sophie Mokoena. Qaanitah, we were obviously in conversation earlier on about the developments. Sophie, thank you for joining us once again, because there have been developments. We were speaking about technical delays. What's the latest following that briefing, or the current briefing by the IDF spokesperson Daniel Gary?
An hour ago, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, issued a statement and a directive to the Israeli Defense Force not to move in terms of the implementation of the ceasefire until Hamas has released names of those hostages who will be released today. We know it's supposed to be 3 people. Hamas, on the other hand, saying that the announcement or the release of the names, it's due to technical reasons. We don't know what those technical reasons are. And we know that it was supposed to have kicked in at 8:30, and therefore there's a delay. Earlier on, just minutes ago, literally minutes ago, we saw the spokesperson of Israel Defense Force talking about that communication, that there's a delay, and therefore there's a delay. We still have to get more details from the side of Hamas in terms of why. But it was expected, as we pointed out, since we started looking at the possibility of this ceasefire, that it doesn't get very smooth. You always have those delays. Even you'd recall during that permanent temporary pause, there were some delays. And I think it has got to do with logistics. As I pointed out earlier on, you have to move these people. And as you move them from one location to the other, it's not just taking them to the border. Hamas will hand them to the Red Cross. The Red Cross will then hand them over at the border to Israeli Defense Force. On the other hand, the Israeli Defense Force and the officials must do the same with the Palestinians. So their logistics can be quite difficult, because you also want to ensure that nothing happens. There's no ambush on your way to the border to hand over the hostages. The same with Palestinians. So it's not an easy task, particularly after there was a delay in terms of Israel agreeing finally to this ceasefire.
Thank you for those opening remarks. Qaanitah, let's go back to some of the remarks you were making just before the ad break. We were looking at Israel's domestic politics as well, perhaps how that's also now been affected. What comes to the fore, particularly following your visit to Palestine, being a South African, given the ICJ case that's also underway?
Yeah, so obviously the local dynamics in Israel plays a big role, and is attributed to the delay in the implementation or the agreement of the ceasefire. You would know that there's not much that changed from the initial proposal that was on the table in Qatar, something like in May last year or in June last year. And this obviously is attributed to the local dynamics in Israel around the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet is made up of a fragile coalition, and that he is obviously very much reliant on far-right politicians within his cabinet who have threatened to pull out of his government if a ceasefire persists. So you see the sentiment expressed, especially in protest within Jerusalem, where you have a far-right community and those politicians insisting that there must not be a ceasefire and that the war must continue in Gaza. And then you have the families of the hostages and other Israelis desperate for some movement for a return of these hostages. You know that there's about 100 hostages or so, dead and alive, within Gaza, and that part of this agreement there will be 33 people that will be handed over. The most critical is this first 3, which Hamas has to now present their names and then ensure this handover, so that there is this equal good faith, because Palestinians are waiting with bated breath about the 1,000 Palestinian prisoners who will be then handed over subsequent to that.
No doubt this is a massive development internationally. So I suppose the different facet of this development is the international community. So what role did the international actors play insofar as facilitating this agreement? And do you get a sense that there was any significant pressure from the international community for both parties to act in the manner that they did?
I think that there was huge international pressure, but I think it boiled down to the United States, and the United States drawing that line in the sand between the outgoing President Joe Biden and the incoming President Donald Trump, who will obviously take a lot of the credit for this implementation, or at least the agreement that is now being effected. So yes, there has been huge amounts of pressure from the international community, but Israel has been disdainful and completely, ignored what the international community, particularly the United Nations, has been saying for such a long time. And it boiled down to the pressure being espoused by the United States, and Qatar being that mediating player to bring everyone to the table. Representatives from the US government, representatives from Hamas, representatives from Israel, to say, right, 15 months later, let there be movement.
Yes. And speaking of the international pressure exerted by the United States in particular, how do you assess, the balance of concessions that was reached between Hamas and Israel?
I think that it was exactly on the table for the last few months, and it essentially boils down to, the hostages for concessions around the war. The issue then is, what happens post 42 days, and I think the phased attempt at a ceasefire, because there's the immediate part, which is cessation of hostilities, just stopping bombs in the sky today. And then there's the subsequent things of what happens to all of the hostages on Israeli front, but also how do you then deal with your immediate challenges of hunger and starvation in terms of aid? And then comes in the consequent discussion around rebuilding of Gaza. I don't think that conversation even is facilitated right now. For now, it's let's just stop the war as they know it.
But perhaps thank you for speaking to the longer solutions in terms of Palestinian statehood, or even that two-state solution. What's also been reflected at this hour, given the dynamics?
Well, no, I think I want to go back to what Simpiwe asked about the international community. Included in those who were working very hard to ensure that you have this ceasefire is Egypt, that has suffered a lot, particularly with that Rafah crossing, and also fearing that they are likely going to be pressurized to receive refugees if the real challenge continue to persist. And therefore, I think Egypt played a very important part. But coming back to the third, when you talk about where to from here in terms of permanent solution, it is proposed in the third phase, as Qaanitah has pointed out, the rebuilding of Gaza. And that is going to cause a huge contestation, because it has to do with money also. Who is going to benefit in the rebuilding? But the question is, who is trusted by the Palestinians with that kind of a process? You can't just bring in people that Palestinians don't trust. On the other hand, we'll have Israel saying, we want people that we trust, because there won't be a rebuilding and capacitating of Hamas. So it's going to be a real contest. But it's quite an important day. Unfortunately, there's this delay. Let's hope something will happen during the day where we're going to get an announcement that finally these people have been able to agree in terms of the names and the release of the hostages. It has been
we are
too
monitoring
much.
those developments, absolutely.
Right. Ladies, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And I suppose the jury's still out on, what prospects will this have in terms of, negotiating for, further lasting solution in Israel. Thank you so much for joining us. That was award-winning journalist and Qaanitah Hunter, and as well as SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena, just sharing their thoughts and insights about the developments in Israel.